So, as always, politics are in the news. That doesn't seem to change. What is a change is what are the politicians talking about? Right now, we're hearing a lot about the debt ceiling and the need to increase the US debt ceiling so government can pay their bills or maybe not. The debt ceiling came out of the need to accrue more debt during world wars. Before this general ceiling amount was approved, Congress actually had to approve borrowing specifically for each purpose. Now, despite partisan disagreements, Congress and the president have never officially allowed the U.S. to default on its debt. The debt ceiling has actually been modified 102 times since World War II, according to the Congressional Research Service. The last time the debt ceiling was raised was December of 2021, when it was increased by $2.5 trillion. Now, unfortunately, this kind of political situation is not new. In 2011, during the Obama administration, a Republican-controlled House and the White House engaged in a standoff that wasn't resolved until July 31st, just 2 days before the debt ceiling was projected to be breached. Now, during this standoff, for the first time, U.S. debt was actually downgraded in quality by S&P. When debt is downgraded in quality, the borrower has to pay higher interest, making the cost of operations that much higher in the future. You can see how this debt negotiation and the tension associated with it played out in the stock market. What we're seeing here is something called the VIX, which is a measure of stock market volatility. And you can see right near the end of July how that VIX just spiked in terms of measure of volatility. The stock market began to get very nervous about whether or not the president and Congress were going to reach a deal. Now, ultimately, they did reach a deal, but again, it was only 2 days prior to the debt ceiling being breached. Now, federal debt increases when total expenditures exceed total receipts. So federal expenditures include Social Security payments, Medicare payments, Defense Department, as well as paying principal and interest on U.S. debt. Total receipts generally come from taxes. One thing to remember about the debt ceiling problem is it's not the same as a government shutdown, which is the possibility that when the federal budget has not been approved and Congress has not appropriated dollars, that the departments would not have money to spend. In this case, the money has been appropriated. In other words, past Congress sessions have approved the budget currently in place, but there's not enough money coming in terms of those receipts to actually create the cash to pay the bills that we previously committed to doing. Now, what about the two sides here? What are they really arguing over? Their positions are they taking? The president is really focused on the immediate consequences of a default, as is Secretary of the Treasury Yellen. They're just afraid that failing to follow through on spending commitments, particularly paying the interest and principal payments on Treasury borrowing, would be terrible for the U.S. economy and standing in the world. The House Republicans are drawing attention to our increasing national debt and the rate of that increase recently. And now with this newer, higher interest rate environment, the interest costs associated with servicing this ballooning debt is going to be very, very expensive. It's been funded by debt with maturities shorter than 5 years. So as that debt matures, we're going to be borrowing or refreshing the debt at increasingly higher interest rates. Now, both sides are trying to portray their position as being the most important. The president's concern may be more urgent, but perhaps not more important if policymakers are thinking long term. Now, on Friday afternoon, I had the opportunity to talk with Jay and Dwayne from Baird Advisors about the debt limit circumstance that we're currently in. Jay and Dwayne have combined 39 and 36 years of experience managing portfolios with an emphasis on fixed income. They've seen this kind of thing before, so I was really interested in whether they thought this time was really different. One of the things that they said right off the bat is that the likelihood of a default is very, very low, very unlikely. There is a small chance that the negotiating parties will miss the X date. That's the day that the government runs out of cash to pay the bills, but that would result in the first default in U.S. history. As Dwayne and Jay said, the issue here is 99% political, but because politicians are involved, something irrational could happen. At a press conference, Fed Chairman Powell was asked about this, and he said that he didn't even want to entertain the possibility of that the U.S. must increase the debt limit. It's almost unthinkable that we wouldn't do so. There is a meeting scheduled for the two parties to get together on February 9th, the White House and congressional leaders, on May 9th. The likelihood, according to Jay and Dwayne, of a permanent settlement is pretty unlikely at this meeting because there's just so little time to get it done. What is most likely, they think, is a ripcord option where both sides would agree to just extend the debt ceiling limit until maybe September 30th so that it would get in line with the regular budgeting process in Congress. We'll see. So what did Jay and Dwayne offer as advice for investors considering the things going on? Well, one of the things they said is that a duration diversified bond and cash portfolio continues to make sense. Having everything in a money market could create some unwanted volatility, actually, because many money markets hold short-term treasury bills, which could see unusual volatility leading up to the X date, particularly if it's missed. Like many low probability events, investors should want to diversify their holdings while not abandoning their long-term investment strategy. The debt ceiling is not a problem because of any economic weakness. If anything, the economy has remained resilient even as the Fed has raised rates trying to slow it down. And the long-term history of U.S. economic growth and market growth fueled by companies creating profits has been, as Warren Buffett says, a tailwind for investors. And you can see this tailwind effect even in the volatile time around 2011 and the debt standoff then. This chart extends the window we looked at earlier for the VIX. And here we can see the stock market definitely did not like the uncertainty associated with that standoff in 2011. The purple line representing the S&P 500 dropped over 10% in those days immediately leading up to that debt standoff. However, if we extend it, you can see that the recovery, when it came in the fourth quarter, came unannounced and came very strongly, so that investors were actually amply rewarded if they stayed invested in that diversified portfolio of stocks and bonds over that 2-year window. So in summary, I like to go back to what Jay said about the current debt ceiling situation, that it's primarily political and highly unlikely to go all the way to default, but you can't be 100% sure. That's true of almost everything that we think about. So what can investors do in light of this uncertainty? We continue to believe that investors who take a long-term optimistic view of economic growth and innovation put themselves in a good position to be rewarded, knowing that trying to make any short-term predictions is mostly a waste of time. I think Joe Wiggins said it well in this observation. Most things matter far less than we think they will when we are living through them, like we are right now. Thanks for watching today. If you have other questions or topics that you'd like to see us address in Financial Perspectives, we'd welcome your input. You can send them to the contact information you see on the screen. Otherwise, we hope to see you in 2 weeks. So until then, be well.